everybody. Today we are with Lucinda. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Lucinda Dobinson and I run a brand storytelling consultancy in London. We specialise in startups and particularly tech companies because I worked in-house for a couple of years as the global head of creative strategy at one of the biggest cybersecurity firms in Europe. So we're taking what I've learned there and trying to bring it to some other businesses that need that support. And I think actually our work's particularly relevant to the topic you're covering, Aurelien. So thank you very much for inviting me on today.
You're very welcome. So let's start with the first question. Could you please share a story where information helped you to succeed, where it was very, very key in your success?
Yeah, so it took me a little while to think about this because I feel that this is, it's an area where almost everything I do, information is either success or failure for me. But when I thought about it, I felt that there was one particular time, and it's one of the things that actually sparked me to start this business, which was during my time at the cybersecurity firm. And what I found there was that marketing's very siloed out from other departments, particularly in tech firms, because they're often founded by people who are very interested in the technology and the product, not so much interested in the commercial side. And they bring people in because they want you to sort that problem out for them. And I was very lucky that the founder that brought me into the business, he was very good at giving the time to trying to express what it was that he was doing and his vision succinctly and to help me understand, because coming in as somebody without a technical background, I was in advertising for years before that in the creative department. It was a completely different environment. It really took me a while to understand even the basic concepts of cybersecurity, because most people don't know these things at all. And that's one of the information challenges that we had in communicating out as well, is that you're trying to explain why you need a product to someone that doesn't understand the marketplace or even the very basics of that sector at all. So it was actually a really good exercise that he sat and explained it to me like I was a 7-year-old over and over again until we got to a place where we could explain that on, and he was happy with me explaining it in that way. But that time was absolutely essential. If I just listened to the people already in the commercial team in the business, we'd never have arrived at that. And what I actually found was that you had a certain amount of misinformation that was being peddled really by the salespeople in that business, because they didn't have the level of understanding that they needed to have of the product and how it was different. So they were interpreting for themselves without the technical understanding to do that. And it was causing a lot of tension internally between the technical people and the commercial team. So this was just an information gap that was growing and growing and growing and growing. And particularly because the technical people really upset to feel that they were part of a company that was telling people things that weren't true. And that's a massive responsibility we have as communicators and marketers, is that we are authentic in our portrayal of our solutions, and that we're not telling people things that simply aren't true. You get an awful lot of that in cybersecurity. It's a real problem.
So how long it took you to understand and become familiar with the field?
So I'd say that there were kind of peaks and troughs. So you'd get over a hurdle, and I think often what happens with understanding areas is that the first thing that you realize, you have this kind of false sense of how much you know when you start to understand a little bit. And then you get into the next level of understanding and you realize how much you don't know, and there's this sort of trough of disillusionment, and it's horrifying because then you realize that actually there's so much that you had no idea about. And then you get to a place where you maybe have certain areas of depth of understanding. But I mean, the truth is, with an industry like cyber, is rapidly evolving. There's experts with extreme depth of knowledge in different areas, and the truth is that you're never going to know all of it. So the best thing to do is accept your ignorance and just keep fact checking and going back to the people, the very broad range of people that you need to be in contact with to sense check what you're saying and make sure that what you're saying is true. So a lot of my job became about relationships, really.
It's actually a very good point that you just made, because when you ask expert, usually, I mean, one way of recognizing an expert is when people acknowledge the fact that they don't know everything about their field, their own field. So if I understand properly, what you just shared is that the key element here is that you had a mentor that helped you to understand and become familiar with the field. So that was
Absolutely.
very critical. So you had someone who helped you to understand the field. Thanks for sharing that. So moving on, different story that you can share where there was the opposite that happened, where you actually failed because you had a misinformation or a lack of information.
Yes. So I think the example that really came to mind for me, and probably it's because of what's going on at the moment and the fact that we're all working from home and we're physically separate from our teams. They were examples where I, as a leader, have not taken the time to understand what's really going on. And I think that's a very easy thing to do, especially when you're busy, when you are physically distant, you're relying on people to be autonomous and you have to trust them. And if they're not delivering for any particular reason, it's very easy to go straight in with an aggressive, why hasn't this happened? When's it going to be done? Very factual questions. And actually quite often what you need to do is you need to have a conversation that's much more personal and not even touch on that piece of work yet. Just wanted to check in, how are you doing, what's going on, and understand the context of what's going through that person's head. Because in my experience, particularly in the creative sector, when people aren't delivering, it's usually because they're experiencing a certain level of anxiety and they're feeling overwhelmed. And you need to understand what's causing that anxiety and help to diffuse it. So if you come straight in and are very demanding, you're just amplifying it and making the problem worse. And that's the thing that I think when I was less mature, I became a manager quite young. I had my first team at 25, and it's a real curve, understanding what it is that helps people to grow and progress that you have to go through as a manager, and you have to keep realizing that you get it wrong, and you have to maintain. Again, it's all about relationships, isn't it? Access to information is really about taking time to understand people, and I think there'll be a lot of people at the moment who will be feeling particularly anxious, finding it hard to get out of bed, finding it hard to just act as if everything's normal, they're in a different environment. And I think so that personal level of information and just taking the time to understand where people's heads are at, that's really, really key as well.
So is there anything you wish you knew early on in life, or is really something that you realize that it's just about experience, dealing with people? There's no book that can teach you how to behave with people really, right? Or do you think you could have done that a bit better? Or
there's so many things. I think the first thing is that when you graduate and you go out into the working world, you're very arrogant at first. So it's that same thing, isn't it, of knowing what you don't know. I wish I could go back and tell my young self all the things that I thought that I knew. But then sometimes you have to go through the embarrassment of overreaching to realize that you didn't know and you got things wrong, and nothing will teach you that lesson except doing that. And I think also that compassion is really important. A lot of people come into the working world and they see it as a competition. And the truth is that really successful companies, there's room for everybody's success. Somebody else's success isn't your failure. And again, that all comes back to anxiety, doesn't it? It's just instilling confidence in people and actually empowering people to feel that they have time and that their work's valued and that they're there for a reason, and the company's not doing you a favor by giving you a job. You're there because people want you there. And I think that that's a thing that I've seen go really wrong in businesses, and I'm so glad to have seen that go wrong, because now I hope that I'll never make that mistake in my business. And if I do, I hope that I will have created an accountability framework. People are able to bring me the information that that's happening. That's another function of brand for me, is that you create a framework of accountability so that people can highlight these issues, because that's another massive point of failure within a business. Is as a leader, you become more and more remote from what's happening on the ground, and you really need to know. You need to know what's happening day to day in the business processes that you're not involved in. And I've seen that really go wrong. And creating mechanisms by which people can tell you things and can hold you accountable to your values is such a key thing. And when I'm dealing with startups, I think that's one of the things that we really try and build in the model from the beginning that people forget about, is that culture is just as important as your brand.
So very interesting that you just mentioned that a founder this person needs to keep being informed. But as you grow the business, there's so much information. So, I can ask you this question now. When you're surrounded by so many flows of information and data, how do you actually, sort out what is important, what is not? At some point, a CEO needs to take decision on what they should ignore, filter out. So how do you yourself, how do you deal with that?
Well, again, and I'm not going to claim to say that I've got this all figured out, because I think we're all learning every day how to do this well. But there is this thing of leaning into your strengths and recognizing where other people have the skills to really be in charge, and making sure that you bring those people in at the right moments. But then it's the relationship piece again, isn't it? Because actually that's the first signal that something's going wrong, is when somebody withdraws or their behavior changes a little bit. And although I might trust people in my team to really run something autonomously, I also need to make sure that I'm still maintaining a relationship with them and making sure that they're okay, so that they come to me if something goes wrong. Because that's when I really, really need to know, is when things are not going right. Like if everything's going perfectly, I don't need to really hear about it. It's when they need help. So I think, again, it comes back to really just trying to be compassionate and check in with people and show them that you care, and that it's okay if things are going wrong, and that you want to support them.
Okay, got it.
How do you manage that?
So it's really about creating this environment of trust, so that people can feel free to communicate and share their feelings. Otherwise, there's no information being
I mean, I do think that gets harder as you get bigger. I'm lucky that my business is
okay,
small.
so now, so as you grow a business, let's say from 5 people to 500, I mean, if you take a big company with, let's say, 50,000 people, the CEO cannot manage, this number of person, or build a relationship with everybody in the company. So that's where it becomes very, very tricky and complicated to get this information from the ground. So that's why some top managers, they need to have some filters in place, to really sort out what is relevant, what is critical, what is important, and what is not. And we are living in a very, very noisy world where you have social media. You've got mainstream media giving so much news on a daily basis, and a lot of them are actually not really important. How do you deal with all the news that you have? You've got Instagram, you've got Facebook, LinkedIn. How do you manage all those streams and channels?
Well, I take quite an active approach to curating my feeds. I mean, I think Instagram particularly can be really toxic if you don't do that and you don't make a conscious choice. I mean, for me, as a woman, I early on decided that if I'm going to have fashion models and beauty bloggers in my feed, they need to be from a diverse range of backgrounds and, different sizes, different colors of skin, everything, so that I'm not seeing just one mode of beauty. That's just an example, but I think it's a really important one, because that's actually meant that for me, my Instagram feed's quite empowering and reassuring, because I see lots of different people feeling very confident. Whereas, I think a lot of young people just see celebrities who look a certain way, and that's a real problem. I think LinkedIn is another platform that can similarly be quite toxic, and people don't really talk about that very much, but there's an awful lot of people trying to create an image, trying to build a profile, and you can scroll through it and feel quite anxious, because also, with the rise of content marketing, everybody's got their methodology, everybody's got their approach. I mean, I tell people this is the only way that you can do branding, and it can become exhausting because no one can do all of those things. So I think there's an element at which you have to remember it's not real, and you have to take conscious breaks, and also realize when something's having an effect on you, that you have the power to turn it off and move away from it. But also, I think it's really, really important to come back to that point about like beauty, to maintain the diversity of different inputs. So when we spoke earlier, I was saying to you that I really make a point of keeping people on my Facebook whose views I don't agree with and who say things that I think, to be honest, sometimes I think that their views are disgusting. But it's really important to be informed about the fact that they exist, because I have a lot of friends who live in a little bubble and they're really shocked by things that happen politically, and they don't see it coming, and they don't understand the mentality behind it, and they also stop relating to these people as people, and they see them a bit as monsters.
How did you become aware of the fact that some social media can be bubbles and do not show the reality? Is there any,
Yeah.
anything happened that make you, become very aware of that?
Well, I think the obvious example is Brexit. In London, in the arts, and advertising, I don't think a lot of people thought Brexit would happen. I knew it would. I was not surprised. I have a lot of people in my feed from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it was the same with the recent election. A lot of people didn't expect Boris to win by a landslide, but I could see people who I would think of as traditional Labour voters in the north saying on Facebook very pro-Boris statements, which would have been unheard of. And that's like an early indicator of a massive sea change, right? Like people openly sharing views that they would have been vilified for. And these are things, if you don't have people who are very different to you in your world, then you just don't know it's happening.
So you kept some people who were pro-Brexit in your social media feeds on purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. And all sorts of different views. I mean, I have people, I went to university somewhere that was very international. I have a lot of Trump voters in my feed. I think it's important to understand the mentality. I don't live in America. I don't understand US politics in the way that somebody who votes in America would. It's important to see people's very personal experiences, because often I find people rationalize to a story they already have in their head. So they find the information to go and make that story true. And that's a really difficult instinct to fight. And it's one that we all have to fight, right? We need to try and understand what the real story is.
So you think that Brexit is a real game changer in terms of how people view the social media in the UK, but more broadly in the world?
Well, and of course, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that social media was manipulated for that election. I'm sure I won't be the only person you interview who talks about this. It's such a key moment in world history where it was so obvious that that happened. And I think hopefully that's made people more aware, but I think a lot of people aren't. We've got a massive communication challenge right now in London.
Because there's still some bubbles.
Exactly. And people just, they're getting the wrong information about coronavirus. They don't know that they shouldn't be leaving the house, or they think it won't affect them. And, it'd be interesting to see how the government handles it.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing all those, experience and your personal story. If you can just give us one last piece of advice, how to navigate, this landscape, this very noisy landscape of misinformation on social media and, on a daily, work. One piece of advice, that one trick or tips that you're doing to with your personal life and your business life?
I think it's the same tip that I have for everything in life, that there's this crucial moment where you realize that you are in control and you have the power, and you don't have to just be passive. You can actively step out of conversations, you can switch things off, you can add your own view, that you don't have to be a passive participant, you can be an active participant, and you can change the landscape around you. And that's a really important, I think that's a really important lesson for life. It's the same anywhere. It's the same in a business, it's the same in relationships. The way things are for you is the way you make them.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that we should be proactive towards information, no matter what it is. Very well. Thank you for this very valuable piece of advice. We wish you all the best for your business.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been great to talk to you.
Wonderful.